self-evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you are dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin, here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Happy to be with you. Today's show is going to be about defining America. And I'm going to do that by discussing 6 different topics, I think, that are not only current events, but kind of relatively timeless with regard to this country. That would be abortion, immigration, trade, fairness, religion, and race. We'll start with abortion, which is fairly recent only because of the Roe v. Wade ruling back in 1973. It's not that abortion has not been happening in America and throughout the world before that time, but the debate crystallized in the early 1970s as a direct result, in my view, of the sexual revolution, which was, quite frankly, an attempt to confer the same level of sexual irresponsibility upon women that they believe men enjoyed. And I'm not going to say that men did not enjoy and still do not enjoy a relative degree of sexual irresponsibility when it comes to children and procreation. Nevertheless, that doesn't change the role of women, the natural role of women, which I know that they object to. Many object to that. And with every role, there are certain responsibilities. And to be honest with you, it only takes one side enforcing their role to compel the other side to do their part. If women choose not to be sexually irresponsible, then men are left with being either sexually responsible or becoming homosexual. I mean, those are kind of your choices. Those are not necessarily viable choices for more than 95% of men, as the homosexuality rate has never been more than 4% in America. Nevertheless, we have that discussion. The problem with the sexual revolution and giving women rights that they did not enjoy previously, well, that's the old law of unintended consequences. Just because you create a chemical means to get rid of procreation or the natural results of the procreative act doesn't mean that it's not going to occur. Abortion to this date is highly effective, but not totally effective. Just doesn't always work. And the pill, of course, back in the early 70s was less reliable then than it is now. Plus, there are fewer methods of contraception there were back then than there are now. Then there's the other part, which is just the human element. People make mistakes. when you are going to do something that is against nature, you have to be pretty, well, you have to be pretty circumspect about that. If you have to take a pill, you have to take that pill at the time you're supposed to. If you're supposed to have an injection, that has to occur at the proper time as well. Otherwise, nature will take its course. So the whole thing about giving women something to which they're not naturally entitled, which is the same level of sexual irresponsibility that men have, simply because women have been entrusted with the next generation, bearing it and bringing it into the world. Can't have it that way. But since they want that and can't have that, the idea becomes to slander men and to slander all, no matter who they are, who believe that women should not have the same level of sexual irresponsibility that men can be afforded. Well, that's not fair. Well, I'm sorry, life's not fair. Now, the interesting thing to me about all of this is when you talk about abortion, you're comparing two, I do not believe, equal rights. You have the woman's right, which really is non-existent and is an invention in the mind of progressive, just progressives and their like who find themselves onto a bench as a judge. And they have invented a right, and it's purely invented, that women have a right to kill their child in the womb. And it's a largely unfettered right. And, pretty much always has been until fairly recently, and now you're seeing some crack down on that. But you have that right because really it's a matter of convenience. When I say it's a matter of convenience, the woman's right is simply a right to have a convenient life. Why do I say that? Because according to the Alan Guttmacher Institute, which is the research arm of Planned Parenthood, 98.5% of abortions in the United States are done for the convenience of the woman. Only 1.5% or less of abortions performed in the United States are due to rape, incest, or trying to protect the life of the mother. All three of those combined account for less than 1.5% of abortions in America. So we know that the whole argument is trying to make life more convenient for women so they can have sex without consequence, as they believe men are. They want to be men. It's okay. Just call it what it is. And two of those three exceptions are bogus if you're actually trying to weigh, well, why should she have to put up with having the baby of a... Excuse me. For those, and this is particularly for those who actually have a godly mindset or have God on their minds at all, when God, who is the only one who gives conception, by the way, or grants conception, by the way, I believe he knows the circumstances that under which every conception is going to occur. And he's never promised you that you would have things just the way you wanted. The question is, will you do what would please him no matter what circumstance you face? And all the what about the man, well, okay, but we're not talking about the man. The man doesn't get pregnant, never has, never will. Deal with it. But let me get out of this something for a real quick minute. The whole, stay out of my womb argument. How is it that applies to politicians who are not trying to touch anybody's womb, but it doesn't apply to the men who impregnate them? Because, as you said, since 98% of these abortions are totally elective things, they definitely invited these men into their wombs. And then how come it never applies to the abortionist who actually has to go into the womb to kill the child and remove it? I don't get that. Now, if I go over and start looking at the fact that the debate over abortion in America, those who favor abortion have been on the losing side for decades. The number of abortion outlets, legal abortion outlets in this country, is at its lowest point since Roe v. Wade was signed. It went to a high, I would say, in the early 70s, as early as 1976 or something like that. And then it has been steadily declining to the point where there are many counties in some states that only have one legal abortion provider within their borders. And if you think that is a result of anything other than the will of the American people, then you're sadly mistaken. And oh, by the way, that includes women. Because as some people famously say, women are 52% of the population. And they did not object when the number of legal abortion outlets declined. They did not. And we're seeing some women who have risen through the political ranks to be governors of states signing some of this legislation that restricts abortion into law. So, if this is a woman's issue, how come all women aren't on board? It's more a children's issue. It's more a family issue. But you're not going to get that many people on the side who favor abortion to support that. What they are looking to do is, since they have had the advantage in the media to portray this as a constitutional right, which doesn't make sense. You have a constitutional right to destroy a human being. Unfettered. And for no other reason than than that human being inconveniences you. In almost any other setting, that would be a definition of murder. Almost any other setting. But for some reason, if it's a woman taking action against the most defenseless human being available, it is somehow said, well, that's just between her and her doctor. Doctor? Butcher? Really? Come on. And I'm just shattered by all the cases. Well, what about the 11-year-old girl who was a victim of rape? Are you going to make her have that baby? Someone help me understand how the circumstances of someone's conception cheapens the value of their life. I've never quite got my arms around that. If your biological father inseminated your biological mother through rape, that means you're a throwaway. I've never understood that logic. I understand the trauma. I understand it is difficult. But your temporary difficulty, 40 weeks out of your life, how am I supposed to compare that to someone not having a life at all just to convenience you? You wouldn't say that if it was your wife or mother or daughter. What I would say is that life is more important than how you feel about it. And that would include me. Would I feel great about my daughter giving birth or carrying to term the child that was conceived by such means? Of course not. But how can I take my revulsion at one person who did wrong and transfer that over to another who's done nothing at all to anyone? Well, you know, that might be in the genes and he's passing it on. Really? Really? Then let me hit that. If you believe that all these terrible traits are genetically encoded and are passed on, then why are you not going throughout the inner cities and urban areas where black criminals run rampant and spaying and neutering at will? And get all that out of the culture. Why don't you go where, since you believe these things, go into the communities where Caucasians live and opioid addiction and suicide rates and high numbers of kids going out and getting guns and shooting up schools, and let's go in there and spay and neuter everybody in that population and keep that from continuing. Do you recognize how stupid you sound? as Scripture says, the sins of the father are not the sins of the son, and everyone will answer for their own. But the idea that this is now going to just pass on through the genes, no, I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. It never has. For those reasons and others, which includes just the basic nature of what America is, abortion proponents have been losing the debate for years. And that's why, despite what the Supreme Court did in 1973, and despite what had been happening in the states, different states, that is why you have abortion on the ropes. And even apart from legislation, there just aren't that many operating places in America where you can go. Because the people don't like it. They don't like children being killed in the womb. And it's a very much a NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. And there are so many backyards in which it is considered abhorrent, repulsive, that there just aren't that many legal abortion providers operating in this country anymore. Here's what you need to understand when it comes to defining America with respect to abortion. Abortion strikes at the heart of the family and of its children. It is the death knell to both. There are no families without children. You just have marriages. And if there are no children within marriages, marriage loses an essential reason for being. You just don't get married just to get married. You get married to bring what you have together and continue it. And that continuation means children. But what about all those who can't have children? Now, that is between them and God. If they want to try to get a doctor to intervene and he can, that's up to them. But abortion is anti-child, obviously, and anti-family, ultimately. As a result, abortion cannot have an enduring place in the society of a great country. It cannot. The time has come for the American people to stop trying to ride the fence about abortion, because that is the thing that is keeping it most alive. Instead of dealing with what is happening 98% of the time, you have irresponsible females going out there and getting knocked up and then saying, oh, darn, I don't want this, let's go kill the kid. If you don't think that's appropriate, then what Alabama did is exactly the right thing. Well, what about rape? I'll say it again. Please explain to me how the circumstances of one's conception lessens or devalues that person's life. And what kind of statement does it make about a culture? I have two things. What culture would force a rape victim to have a kid? Versus what culture would allow a human being to be sacrificed simply because you didn't like how he was conceived? It is about whether or not you value life or the convenience of women. I value life much more than I value the convenience of females. And as a result, I don't think abortion is acceptable, nor should it be. The growing number of Americans are in agreement with that idea. They don't think it should be acceptable. They don't think it should continue. And they definitely do not agree with taking a child partially out of the womb, evacuating its skull so it no longer has a brain, and then finishing the delivery. It doesn't agree with the idea of having a child make it through the birth canal intact and then have its mother, and I use that term loosely, and a doctor, and I use that term even more loosely, decide whether the child can live longer. That's what was going on in Virginia. The law that was being debated before the governor got discovered, or so they say, in blackface from a picture from I don't know how long ago. You cannot have something that rips the heart out of families by destroying the children, destroying the next generation. You cannot have that in a prominent place in any country that is going to be good, great, or dominant. The United States should be all three. And as a result, abortion should be something that is almost never mentioned for the women, children, and families within her borders. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', will be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also, WDDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Continuing with the topic of defining America, let's come to the topic of immigration. That's an old debate, and the roots of that debate are resurfacing. And for a long time, we have tried to humanize the debate when the debate about immigration, has never reasonably been, nor ever should it ever become an issue of humanity. We're trying to, what about people? What about, give us your tired and your poor, your huddled masses. Why do people keep forgetting that Ellis Island was not exactly in New York City? It's in the harbor. And why do people forget that during the time that it was open, nearly 250,000 people never made it off the island into America? They were stopped, they were turned aside, they were quarantined because of sickness, their views, or their criminal history, and sent on the next thing smoking back away from America. That's what happened. The vast majority did make it in, but they didn't all. And the reason was very simple. If you were not physically, ideologically, or ethically, and in that regard, we're talking about you were flipping criminal, you weren't deemed worthy of being added to the American number. We have sick people in America. We don't need to import any. We have enough anti-American insurgents already in the border. We don't need to import any more. And we have no shortage of criminals. We do not need those from other countries. That was the case in the 1800s. It was the case in the 1700s. It's the case in the 1900s. It's the case today. American immigration has always been about, do we have enough people to exploit the American opportunity? Because if you don't, then you really need to figure out what it is that you want to do with this opportunity that you have in America. You can't just let people in. The tired, the poor, the huddled masses that we were yearning to have come in and breathe free, that was it. They had to be yearning to breathe free. That is overlooked. It's not that they were poor, tired, and huddled. It is, what do you want to do with your life? Because if you don't want to live free, if you don't want to breathe free, you can stay where you are. We only want the ones who want to live free. So the issue was adding those who are compatible with the national ethic. The issue is balancing the opportunity for immigrants with the national need. A whole lot of people would be benefited by coming to America. but which ones would actually benefit America? Somehow over the course of time, that second thing has become some type of, how can you even think that? It's terrible for you to think that. You act like people can't make their countries more like America than it already is. There's no reason for Central America to accept the fact that they have a bunch of dictatorships. The people of all those countries outnumber the folks who are ruling them. If they wanted to, they could rise up and deal with it. Well, that's hard to do. We did it! That's how we ended up with a country in the first place. A bunch of people who outnumbered King George and all the folks in England rose up and said no. So by asking them to fix their problems in their own countries, we're asking them to do no more than those who founded America did for us. Anyway, when we focus on humanity versus nation building, and when I say nation building, I'm not talking about foreign nations, I'm talking about our nation. When we're not looking at immigration as a way to build our nation, then that's really stupid. And if we're going to overly emphasize the contributions that immigrants would have and not take into account the allegiance that they would give to this country, I'm not interested in making the whole world smarter, making the whole world richer, and then having them carry that intellect, that ingenuity, and capital out of America. And that's where I would say I probably seem to differ from the current president. I make it very simple. Until you tell me that you have allegiance to this country, I don't assume that you do. I assume that you have an allegiance to yourself and you think it's going to be in your best interest to be in this country. But that said, that doesn't tell me that you care about this country. That's what I want to know before I let your brilliant self come here and take advantage of what we have to offer. Are you just doing this to hit and run? Is this just a one-night stand for you? Or are you looking to get married? Yeah, I'll put it that way. Because if immigration does not build America, why do I want it? Think about that for a time. When we were looking at the waves of immigration that happened before, what were we looking at? We were looking at a country that had more land than people, just resources and land and all this, and we needed people to come and transform those opportunities into national power, into a national will, into a national consciousness. And so we threw everything open, and we had all kinds of missteps, we had all kinds of overreactions, we had all kinds of interesting things go on. There was a China restriction where we basically told people that if you're from China, you are not allowed to immigrate into the United States. We did that. That was federal law. China Exclusion Act, I think it was called. And I know I'm not going to talk about slavery and Africans under or African slavery as part of immigration. Totally different subject. We'll get to that. But this is what you need to understand. When all this was going on before, we were talking about a country that had 50 million, 70 million, 100 million people. We didn't, and illegal immigration. Am I saying there was no illegal immigration? No, that's not true. But you have to remember, we got all the way up to 1980, into the 1980s, with 3 million illegal immigrants. I think it was 3,250,000 illegal immigrants they thought were in this country when Ronald Reagan signed that ridiculous amnesty bill. And now we're at 12 million and counting. So you went more than 200 years with a growing population that numbered well over 250 million people, and only 3 million of them were here illegally. We dealt with the problem before. We stopped dealing with the problem when Ronald Reagan signed that stupidity. So, this is a lesson for everybody who's not left of center. Never make deals with progressives. Never make deals with progressives. Because the progressive is never looking to better America. It's easy to make deals with someone who disagrees with you when at the end you're both trying to better the country. Once you acknowledge that progressives want to dismantle and change the country so that it is something that you would never recognize, you do not bargain with them. You do not deal with them. You just don't. Because you know behind everything that they're looking to do is destruction for you and for yours. Easiest way to avoid it? Don't start it. But what about the people who are fleeing and taking and going of asylum? Look, you know what? There have been people, and there still are, people all over the world who are being oppressed. America is not the place where we're looking to dump all the folks who can't handle what's going on in their own countries. Why, if you can't make it in your crap country, why would I want you here when I want the best of the best to continue to make this country the best of the best? There's no argument in favor of that. Well, what about asylum? Well, the problem is our asylum laws. If I understand it correctly, and I've read it, the difference between an asylum seeker and a refugee seeker, someone seeking refugee status, it's not what type of paperwork you fill out as much as it is where are you when you complete the paperwork. Because you can go to a consulate anywhere that the United States has one, and they have one in just about every country in the world. And if you want to apply for refugee status, you can do so with the help of U.S. consulate employees. And if your status is recognized, the U.S. will not only bring you to the country, you don't have to worry about being in a caravan, you'll be brought to America, and you'll be given authorization to work in America. So from the time you step off the plane, train, automobile, or whatever it is that you use to get here, you can go get a job. Now, if you want to seek asylum, you have to get here with your illegal self. And that's what's happening now. The borders are becoming overrun. And it's not that these people are really legitimate asylum seekers. They're legitimately exploiting dumbness in the American immigration system. That if you get here, then you're going to get a hearing, and while you get that hearing, you may just be wandering about the country, and nobody's monitoring these people. So if they're supposed to come back for a hearing and they don't, no one knows where they are. And now they're just in the country. Please understand this for the left. Immigration is about weakening the American ethic. Immigration is about watering down patriotism and love of country by bringing in people who have no allegiance to America at all. They're just here for a buck. Or they're just here for other reasons. Some of those may actually be harmful. And the idea is to bring in enough of them so that you begin to change how America thinks about itself, simply by virtue of the number of people that you bring in who think differently than those who were born here or those who respected American law to the point where they would go through the immigration system correctly and then become members of American society. Once you understand that, you're now up to date in 2019 with everything going on with immigration in this country. This isn't about separating families. No, the families made a decision knowing what was going to happen at the border when they got here. They know they're going to be separated and they come anyway. So how is that on America? You can't separate families. Well then, Democrat Party, you now control the House. Why don't you go ahead and rewrite the immigration laws to prevent that? And also provide the money or the resources to house those who are legitimately coming for asylum purposes, and make sure that that those cases are decided on the other side of the border, instead of allowing these people who may not be telling the truth to come into the border, and then we decide, and by the time we make a decision, there's somewhere where we can't find them. And oh, by the way, some of them do commit crimes. Because unlike what we used to do at Ellis Island, we don't check their criminal history before they get here. At Ellis Island, they checked you out before they let you off that rock. Here, not exactly. Now, not exactly. We're doing ourselves a tremendous disservice. And as a result, immigration is no longer building America. It is tearing it down. And I'll make the statement, and I won't flinch. If immigration into America does not build America, then there is no reason to allow it in America. We don't need any more people. We're full as a tick. Let's define America back to where we were in the beginning. We understand we have a need for people. We don't have a need for just anybody. We have a need for people who want to work. We have a need for people who understand and can recognize opportunity and have the courage and the persistence to pursue and take advantage of it. What we're getting with our current immigration system is people who just want to get paid someone else's money without earning it themselves. That's what the immigration system encourages. And if that's what immigration is, I can't think of any country on the planet, including this one, that needs immigrants. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force of Internet conservatism at TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ, Talk 94.1 FM, Florida, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida, Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk, AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of this first hour, continuing with the theme of defining America, and we're going to talk about trade for a moment. And that fires up one of the oldest debates in America, which is a country founded, at least in part, on the notion of economic liberty. So the question is whether or not you have free trade with everyone, including international partners, foreign partners, like China, or whether or not you have protectionism to keep foreign goods out of your markets to allow your people to develop their own industries at home and not be undercut by the production capabilities of other countries around the world. If you're a pure conservative, if you want to call it that, then of course you want free trade, you want no restrictions on trade whatsoever, and as a result of that, the current discussion about tariffs with China, primarily China, and also with other countries, is particularly distressing to you. And China is at the epicenter, but that situation is being exploited and distorted. For example, right now, of course, the big issue is with soybeans. And those who are enemies of the current president are saying, we should not raise tariffs on trade. We should not have tariffs raising them with China because China won't buy our soybeans, and okay. So, do you have a point there? Somewhat. But what's being distorted is, and actually just not being reported, is the fact that this so-called trade war is not a war at all. It's actually a negotiation. And to put the soybean farmers at the forefront of this is very misleading. Because you have to remember something. The United States is not dependent upon exporting product to run its economy. We're about a 12% export economy. Not much. Compared to China, which is, if I remember, as low as 30, and I mean, it's high, the low might be 30%, and the high might be somewhere around 60%. They cannot grow unless they are running relatively large trade imbalances with their partners. They need to get their goods sold outside of their country, even though they have the largest market in the world just by dint of the sheer size of their population. They need to have large trade imbalances with other countries, or they will not grow their economy fast enough to satisfy the economic needs of their people. It just won't. So as we go through this, what we're finding is that as much pressure as Trump puts on China, well, China's going to retaliate. Well, part of their retaliation, starting back in May of last year, was to cut tariffs on imported cars, to cut tariffs on a wide range of products, including textiles, steel products, computer goods, things of that nature. And that wasn't just with the United States. That was with all trading partners, almost every one of them, particularly those in the region, in that region of the world would be India, another very large population country. And in all this, it was lost for some reason that China actually offered to reset its trade imbalance with the United States, to spend something like $1 trillion over the next few years buying American goods, opening up their markets and buying American goods, to the point that the trade balance between the two countries would be eliminated. Just the books would be clean. None of this really gets reported. You can find it if you want to know. See, that's the interesting thing I've learned about facts and truth. It's not that they're not out there, but if you're waiting for someone to deliver up to you that which is correct and that doesn't serve their interests, well, good luck with that. But if you simply want to know what's going on, if you ask enough people, if you inquire in enough places, and in this information age, where you have search engines and an internet and all these things stored on all these different linked computers all around the world, if you don't know what's going on, it's no one's fault but your own. China is remaking its economy because the United States, its largest trading partner, has said, I don't like the deal I'm getting. You need to make changes. And China has made changes. They've made changes not only between themselves and the United States, but between themselves and the rest of the world. And oh, by the way, if this was really hurting the American people as much as the mainstream media implies that it could or will, can you please explain to me why inflation is not keeping up with wage growth? Let me make that really clear. Wages in the United States are growing faster than the rate of inflation by at least a percentage point. Wage growth is 3.2% year over year. Inflation is less than 2.2% year over year. So where is the harm? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that no one is going to have some negative effect, but there were negative effects from doing nothing. And there have been those negative effects in place for decades. And the thing that I'm getting to is because you had kind of absorbed it and thought it as normal, you're really not quite that bought into understanding what is better. We didn't have free trade with China. We didn't have fair trade with China. China was taking advantage of the United States. Just as Donald Trump said during the campaign. What's the proof of that? Why is it that every time Donald Trump ratchets up the pressure, we find another layer of tariffs that the Chinese had in place against American products and those from other countries as well? Every time. And how come it wasn't being reported? Ever. You got to ask these questions. Now, there are other trade fronts other than China. I mean, you would think by listening to the mainstream media that the only people that we buy goods from or sell them to are the Chinese. It's not true. We just finished, the United States government finished, or at least the executive branch finished, negotiating an overhaul of the NAFTA deal that Ross Perot, when he was running for president in 1992, called the giant sucking sound of American jobs being pulled out of this country south of the border to Mexico. He was right. And it has not been good. All you have to do is remember this. When Donald Trump said he was going to redo NAFTA, the people that you would expect, if that was going to be such a bad thing to respond negatively, you would have expected that from organized labor. They actually favor the new deal that he has crafted, the USMCA, that would replace NAFTA. Now, he's going to have a hard time getting that through a Democrat-controlled Congress because if he does, because remember, NAFTA, that was signed by a Democrat president. NAFTA made it through a Democrat Congress. I can't remember the makeup of the Senate at the time, but I think they were Democrats too. So to give Donald Trump, of all people, a victory to replace NAFTA with something else after NAFTA had 100% Democrat buy-in, yeah, that's a problem, a political problem. And when you are a group that cannot admit that you're wrong, because if you admit that you're wrong about one thing, it exposes your anti-American sentiment elsewhere, they're going to fight that. And it may not be blatant, open warfare, blah, blah, war of words. It may just be we're not going to take it up. We're not going to talk about it. We'll talk past it. We'll ignore it. All this because they don't want the American people to prosper. That's what you have to remember about the Democrat Party. They do not want the American people to prosper. They want those who favor them, whether or not they are American, to prosper. So all the talk that we have where there's negative stuff with Mexico, of course that's on immigration. Why was Mexico first to the table to get an agreement with on the USMCA? Canada was the laggard, and Mexico has nothing bad to say about the agreement. I haven't heard one word of negativity from Mexico about this new agreement that they signed. And NAFTA was a benefit to them. They could have done nothing and continued to try to take advantage of the United States as they had been. It worked in their favor. Now there's a new deal on the table that works better for the United States, and the Mexicans aren't upset by that at all. What does that tell you? Well, Canada wasn't crazy about it. Look, you know what? When you have a prime minister, male prime minister, who has fake eyebrows. You got other problems besides trade. He's a lightweight. He's an idiot. He's just a progressive buffoon. And Canada elected him. And I can't call the Canadians bad because this country elected Jimmy Carter. They recognized that fatal error in one term. This country recognized Bill Clinton. Elected Bill Clinton and then sat by and watched him jack up the economy only to have it saved by the GOP and then get impeached. And now if you look at him, he's a dead man walking. Bless his heart. But of course, if you're married to Hillary, well. This country elected Barack Obama and suffered the worst 8-year economic stretch in the recorded history of the United States. It was pathetic. So I can't say that the Canadians are, they have the market on doing dumb things. They don't. And we've done dumb things with trade. For the USMCA to even be something that needed to be negotiated tells you how bad we were on trade. For us to keep peeling the onion on China and finding layer after layer of tariffs that no one was reporting on, no one told us about, and was costing the United States billions annually. Let me make this clear. Fair trade that does not enrich America should be replaced with not free trade, but bias and tariffs that push things into balance. Because fair trade, quote unquote, that does not enrich America has no place in her marketplace of ideas. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my good friend, Ron Edwards. After that, we'll be back with hour 2 of Black Man Thinking.
Democrats, have you no sense of decency? Well, I guess that's a pretty dumb question. Hello, I'm Ron Edwards. On today's page from the Edwards Notebook, ever since the Democrat Party came into existence, the main focus has been some sort of oppression, whether it was slavery, Jim Crow, the enactment of laws, regulations, and high taxes. Those are your hallmarks. On every major issue ranging from education, religious liberty, parental rights, abortion, border security, health care, medical care, property rights, etc., Democrats only support policies that either inconvenience, cause economic hardship, division, harm to our overall economy, and aiding those seeking to infiltrate and change our republic via the current legal system. Democrats are proudly serving as useful idiots, helping the Muslim Brotherhood and CARE to mainstream women abusing Sharia law throughout our beloved land of liberty. Democrats berate black Americans like Clarence Thomas, Candace Owens, and even yours truly, because like Frederick Douglass, we desire a prosperous America of equal opportunity and decency, not equal results and victimology. I'm Ron Edwards. Join me next time on another page from the Edwards Notebook and the Ron Edwards Experience, 12 a.m. Sundays on Talk America Radio Network.
Sponsored by the Tri-County Liberty Coalition.
I have a dream. One day, this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
Black Man Thinkin.
Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in the bloodstream. The only way they can inherit the freedom we have known is if we fight for it, protect it, defend it, and then hand it to them with the well-taught lessons of how they in their lifetime must do the same.
Black Man Thinkin.
Anytime you throw your weight behind a political party that controls 2/3 of the government, and that party can't keep the promise that it made to you during election time, and you're dumb enough to walk around continuing to identify yourself with that party, you're not only a chump, but you're a traitor to your race.
Black Man Thinkin.
If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth. And this idea that government is beholden to the people, that it has no other source of power except the sovereign people, is still the newest and the most unique idea in all the long history of man's relation to man. Whether we believe in our capacity for self-government or whether we abandon the American Revolution and confess that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives for us better than we can plan them ourselves.
Black Man Thinkin.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
Black Man Thinkin.
Stanley Levy with Hour 2 of Black Man Thinkin here on the dominant force in Internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, FreedomInAmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Continuing with the theme of defining America, we have 3 more topics, the first of which would be fairness. Now, before I say anything else, I don't think America is an unfair country. I also don't think that life is fair. So trying to get from a country what you can't get from life is a dumb preoccupation. Now, the more recent debates that we have in this area, the ones that control the floor now, really have nothing to do with fairness per se, at least not in an objective or absolute sense. What it does in America is what you have is progressives comparing everything to their standard, and their standard, based on the comparisons they make all the time, is the gold standard to an American progressive is the white male. Everything is compared to what a white male can or cannot do, does or does not experience. That's it. It's not whether or not you are successful in the absolute. It's whether or not, well, if you were an average white male, are you doing as well as he does? Which is ridiculously racist. It's also terribly limiting. Why do I want to be limited to what a white man can do? Whatever he does, good for him. What if I can do more? Why would I want to be compared to somebody who's not as good as I am just because he's white? That doesn't make any sense. But if we're talking about fairness in America, we are really getting to the heart of identity politics, because that's where the debate is for the progressive. Identity politics is saying that the white man has an advantage over everybody. Now, one thing that's always interesting to me is they never say, well, how did the white man end up with this advantage? And then you get the other parts of the identity politics, which the white man is a standard is because he stole everything. He raped everybody, he stole everything, he oppressed everyone, and therefore he's rich and he's intelligent and he's all this stuff. Let me ask you this question. If this one group can so dominate you, then I'm not exactly sure why I'm trying to get you into a better position if you can't compete with the white man to begin with. If you could compete with him, why does he have such a... Well, the white man cheats? Really? Can I ask you a question? Did we have different white people at the end of the Civil War? Because by 1920, Madam C.J. Walker, whose parents were slaves, was a multimillionaire in America as a black woman, a black female, in 1920. There were not a whole lot of American millionaires in 1920. And she got her money by selling hair products to other black folks. And black folks, I'm sorry, have never been a majority of the population in these United States. So she, being a minority, the offspring of slaves, selling hair products to a quote-unquote oppressed group in America, became a multimillionaire ahead of all those white people. How'd that happen? If America is unfair, please tell me. Are you trying to tell me she snuck up on folks? Well, then how come they didn't take her money once she made it? Since America's unfair. They could have said we can't have Negro females making all this money, so we just gonna help ourselves. They didn't do that. That's my point. Well, you're talking about the exception. Let me help you. Let me school you about the exception. If it weren't for the exception, then we would not have abortion in this country. Because that's your whole argument. If it wasn't for the exception, we wouldn't be talking about immigration and separating families, because that is not the primary situation. That is a created situation, created by ridiculous laws and a public relations campaign that is herding Central Americans with their children to the southern border of the United States. That's an exception. You want to talk about exceptions? Let's talk about your police brutality stuff. Oh, Black Lives Matter. Man, the police are out here killing black folks. The police kill 200 black folks a year on average. And violate the law in very few of those cases in doing so. Black folks, on the other hand, kill about 7,500 folks in the street, 7,500 black folks in the street, so many that black make up 52% of homicide victims, even though they're 13% of the population. And 90% of them are killed by other blacks. So why are you talking about the exception of a cop killing a black person and not talking about the more than 90% of black people who are killed by the blacks? Why are you not talking about that? But I digress. The whole issue with fairness in America has simply become, how does everybody compare to the white man? Is everybody making as much money as the white man? Is everybody getting the same type of education as the white man? Is everybody getting the same job opportunities as the white man? Does everyone have the same access to capital as the white man? And there are a whole lot of white men who are asking that same question. Where's mine? Because y'all keep telling me I got privilege. I ain't seen it. A whole lot of white folks ain't seen this white privilege you're talking about. But fairness is now identifying the mythical white male, almost like white whale, and saying that he is endued with some supernatural power to set the standard for everyone in this country, and also the American white male does that for everyone around the world, I guess. The problem is this identity politics, which is at the whole light of this, saying, this comparing this group to white men, that group to white men, all identity politics. And in order to quote unquote level the playing field, we have weakened performance standards everywhere. Did you know, for example, in the military, before they decided we needed women in the military, which we do not. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying women can't serve, but the idea that they're needed, they're not needed. They're flat not needed. We don't need women police officers. It doesn't say we don't. Does that mean that women can't be police officers? It didn't say that. Do we need them? No. Any place where I need strength, where I need physical capability, because I don't think women are cowards. It's not a matter of bravery. It's a matter of capability. Women are not as physically capable as men. I'm sorry. If they were, then the WNBA would be in the playoffs right now trying to go up against the Golden State Warriors. How come that's not happening? Why is that not happening? If they were physically capable, how come a softball field has different dimensions than a baseball field? Why is that? And how come the College World Series doesn't include the women? How come when you go on a basketball court, their ball is smaller? Because men are bigger, stronger, faster. Period. And to allow women into the same roles that men can handle, you have to lower the performance standards to meet the limited capabilities of females. And that's what's been done. Not just that, you have to go into academia and lower performance standards so that you can allow your underperforming identity group, whether they be blacks, Latinos, or someone else, to get the type of representation you think they should have with regard to white people. Now, of course, the exception to that would be Asians, who keep blowing everybody's doors off when it comes to academics, because they do something that the majority of the American population does, that the rest of us do not do. They put in the work. Yes, they have an ethic about education. You can have an ethic about anything you want, but at the end of the day, if you don't put in the work, it's not going to matter. And Asians do put in that work. You want to get some of that work? Not really. Because they have to rescale the SAT when the Asians get through with it. They come through, they come ready, they come through, they come with it. To the point that they are now, not the white man, they are now the academic standard and are being discriminated against. So that we can get the poorer I'm saying it, the poorer performing black kids, the poorer performing Latino children, even poorer performing white children are being given an unfair advantage so that you just don't have as many Asians, because Asian Americans would lock down U.S. higher education if it were merit-based. And see, here's the thing about fairness. If fairness is not merit-based, it can never be fair. Because merit is a matter of what can you do. Everything else is a matter of what we think you are. You may have heard recently that they're looking to change the SAT to give it other factors for consideration, like, well, we grew up where. I got a better idea for you. Get rid of the SAT. Why don't you tell people up front, if you want to go to college, let me give you some information about your competition. All those slots are up for grabs. And colleges should, I know they don't, but should be looking for who are the best qualified people. Because I'm not interested in having a diverse America. I'm interested in having an exceptional America. Fairness would actually say no matter who the best one is, that is the person who is going to get the slot. If it so happens that they all happen to be of one ethnicity, whose fault is that? I'm sorry, it's not the Asians' fault that they're not sitting up here trying to figure out how smart Beyonce is because she got stock in Uber instead of getting paid. They're not worried. He said, well, that's Beyonce's thing. I'm trying to do my thing. It's not the Asians' fault that you can't figure out how you're going to make a heck of a lot of money unless you're doing something with a ball. When those slots are very limited. And oh, by the way, they're controlled by other people. Let me say this. America is a fair country, always has been a fair country. It's just not a perfect country. Well, what about slavery? What about the people who bought their way out of slavery? Frederick Douglass was a slave. He wasn't a slave by the time he died. Was it fair that he was a slave? Not the right question. It would have been unfair to have kept someone of his intellect and capabilities in a subservient position. And the country did not do that. Well, what about the others? Everybody is not going to be able to take advantage of every opportunity. The question is, does the opportunity exist at all? And it does. It did. Always did. There were always free black people in America. Always. Even in the South, there were always free black people in America. Does that mean they had a wonderful life? That's not what I'm saying. But every black person in America was not a slave. Well, that's not fair. So, well, guess what? We resolved that issue 150 years ago. There are no slaves. Chattel slavery is no longer illegal in America, and I don't know of anyone who's being enslaved in that manner. Do you? An imperfect nation is flawed, has flaws that are brought to its attention, addresses those flaws, and keeps it pushing. The whole debate that we have now that is about reparations and all of women doing this and women doing that, and how can we get more of these type of, all this is a nod to mediocre diversity, or better yet, the mediocrity that is a direct result of diversity. Diversity does not lead to excellence. Excellence leads to excellence, and excellence can be diverse, but excellence doesn't come with a quota system, except on performance. The debate that we have about fairness in this country serves to drag the nation toward mediocrity in the name of a useless diversity. It serves no purpose. Well, kids need to have somebody that looks like them. I didn't have anybody. Let me help you out. When I was growing up, I did not have a role model as a military officer, but I became one. I did not have a role model as a black man for program management, but I became one. Not for systems engineering or aeronautical engineering. I did not have one, but I became those things. When I got to the point where my middle management career in engineering wasn't getting me where I wanted to, and I was already on the other side of 50 years old, giving away my age again, I did not have a role model as a black man for being a network engineer, and I became a certified network engineer after the age of 50. Where was my role? No one needs a role model as much as they need an opportunity. Fairness is not about who came before you. Fairness is about, are you going to do what's in front of you? Not who came before, but what lies before. That is what fairness is about. All those things are there in America for those who want to seize opportunity. Diversity is meaningless. And fairness life is never fair. But it is what you make of it. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinking, here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WBDQ, Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia, WJHC, Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio, Freedom in AmericaRadio.com, and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Continuing on with the Defining America theme, I'm going to come to the subject of religion. Okay, we're going to have a little bit of fun here. This is a seminal discussion with respect to America, because America is arguably the only nation founded on the basis of unhindered religious practice. In many countries in the world, you don't have the freedom to practice the religion of your choice and be afforded the best opportunities in a given country. If you are in a Muslim country, for example, and you want to be a Jew or a Christian or Taoist or pick it, Hindu, you're going to run into problems. You're going to run into real problems, and you're going to run into real limited opportunities. Same is true, or was true, throughout Europe. Europe is now pretty much secular humanism, and for those who do not recognize it, that is a religion. It has been replaced, but now it is having to compete with Islam, because Islam is out to take over Europe, Western Europe. Eastern Europe has already said, you're not here. Eastern Europe has said, no, we're not doing that here. Western Europe is in trouble. But America was founded, it was sought out by people who simply wanted to practice their understanding of the Christian faith without being dictated to by the government. And the government's only concession was, fine, get the hints from my presence and you can do whatever you want. So you got to go all the way back to into the 1600s, when people came here for that purpose. And I think in the first few winters, most of them died, but they did manage to hang on and survive. And the country was not founded for another 160, 70 years. This nation was not founded. But the reason people came to the continent from Europe in the 17th century. Now notice, I'm not getting into the who discovered America debate, who discovered the North American continent debate. I'm trying to think of something as meaningless as that, or more meaningless than that. It doesn't matter who discovered it. Because none of the people that we talked about discovered it, because obviously there were already people here when they got here. It wasn't like they came across an empty continent. It wasn't empty of people. It wasn't empty of anything. I am talking about, what are you allowed to do in the land? Why did you have this land? And when you decided to form your country in this land, what place did you give to religion? They chose to give everyone the opportunity that they felt they had been deprived, which was to practice the religion of their choice in the way that seemed good to them. I don't know of any other country so founded. The other thing we need to recognize is that America, even with that religious freedom, and America affords that religious freedom to everyone. They do. We got Wiccans, we got witches, we got Satanists, we got all kinds of idiots practicing whatever they think their religion is in America. And unless, of course, if you're Christian of late, there is no one pushing back against the practice of your religion. Well, Muslims are getting recognized. They're not getting persecuted. They're being recognized. Well, all Muslims aren't terrorists. So the issue is not whether or not all Muslims are terrorists. The question is, what percentage of terrorists are Muslim? And it's darn high. The followers of the Prophet are violent at an alarming percentage. The followers of the Prophet get into cultures that are not Muslim, and they wreak havoc at an alarming percentage. But I digress. The practices or the ideal that America would be founded and run on the principle that everyone has the right to practice their own religion as they see fit, and that should not be interrupted. Well, I mean, that means two things. If you're going to be a Muslim, then you can follow all your Muslim traditions. But it also means that you, in following all your traditions, cannot interrupt the traditions of your neighbor who is not Muslim. The same for the Christian. You can be Christian. You can speak of Jesus Christ openly. You can follow him. You can conduct your life as though Christ is the center of it. At the same time, you cannot infringe on the liberties of those for whom Christ is not the center of anything. That is where America is supposed to be, has been from its founding. And for those who keep forgetting this, and there are a number who do, the founding document of America, and America was founded by a document, by the way. Not all nations are founded by a document. But the American nation was founded by a document, and it wasn't the Constitution. The American nation had a constitution, America had a nation at least 12 years before a constitution was ratified. At least the one we have now. The founding document of this nation is something that's readable in about 15, 20 minutes. No, actually, it takes less time than that. It's the Declaration of Independence, which explained to everyone why England's colonists decided to break politically from the English crown. Well, religion's not in there. Well, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator, who do you think that is, with certain inalienable rights. So religion has a lot to do with that, or at least faith has a lot to do with it. Their faith is that they were created, that they didn't just happen, and they were created by an individual being, and that the rights of mankind flow from the individual being who created them, not from other men. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. And where we run into a real problem, switching gears a little bit on this, is when progressivism comes in. Because progressivism wants all religion, at least the ones that are focused on the God of Israel, removed. They're not the fan of the Jews, and they're not the fan of Christians. But if you have something to say about Muhammad, then obviously you're all right with the progressive movement. Because progressives know, as well as everybody else, that Allah is not God. So it's okay for progressives if you worship Allah, because they know you're not worshiping anything. And progressives are basically secular humanists, and secular humanism is no different than any other religion. It is a religion. It is the religion that celebrates the happiness of man and controlling him so that he is and remains happy according to the dictates of someone else who's supposed to know what makes them happy. So progressivism wants all religion that's focused on the God of Israel removed in favor of Islam and humanism. Here is the problem with that. When you do that, when you take the God of Israel out of the equation, as they did in France at the beginning of the 20th century, chaos ensued. You know what's happened to France since they went totally secular? And the thing that follows secular is humanist. Let me see. They did that prior to World War. Well, they were prior to World War I. They were invaded in World War I and conquered. They were invaded in World War II and conquered. And they've been invaded here in the 21st century and are being conquered by Islam. The first two times it was by the Germans. This third time it's by the Mohammedans. And they don't have an answer. As a matter of fact, many of their political leaders are welcoming the invasion. Angela Merkel of Germany is just blatantly disregarding her people in favor of Muslims who are not German in any way, shape, or form, except for the fact that they now happen to walk along the streets. And the chaos that they have rained down on the female population of Germany is unconscionable. And she has nothing to say about it. She has no crackdown. She has no program. She has no policy statement. She has no policy. But I keep digressing to that. But here's my point. When you remove the God of Israel, you will remove individual freedom and liberty from society. It's inevitable because humanism does not allow individual liberty. It is liberty that must be defined by the collective, and if you stray from that, then you must be adjusted. That's not liberty. That's slavery. Or worse than that, it's democracy. There is no more tyrannical form of government than democracy. Because not only are you compelled to do things against your will, you have to fight everybody who disagrees with you in order to do it. And you're unlikely to win that fight. So you are oppressed anytime 2 out of 3 people, and you're the third person. Anytime there's one more person who disagrees with you than agrees with you, you have no rights. Benjamin Franklin is credited with this saying: democracy is 2 wolves and a lamb voting to decide what to have for lunch. Liberty is a well-armed lamb protesting the vote. The lamb has a religion, but so do the wolves. The free exercise of both necessitates that the lamb be able to defend himself and not be eaten simply because someone else is in the majority and has a different religion. For the more than 240 years that America has existed, other religions have been allowed to exist as well. There have always been Jews, there have always been Muslims, there have always been all these people of every religion you can imagine here in the United States. It has not caused problems. And as long as Christianity is the majority religion, there is no reason. And when I say majority religion, I'm not trying to say America is a Christian nation. It's not. Any nation that would allow abortion cannot be a Christian nation. Cannot. But it is the plurality of faith that is claimed. And as long as that is the case, you can have religious diversity, if you will. And you can still have individual freedom and liberty. Be careful when they try to take these things away. Be very careful. As they tried to do with Jack Phillips in Colorado, forcing him to abandon the practice of his faith and submit that to the homosexual agenda. The Supreme Court somehow found the courage and common sense to say, no, you can't do that. They did it once, and the margin of their decision was significant enough that Colorado, when they tried to go after Mr. Phillips a second time, they decided maybe this is not a great idea. Religion that is based on the God of Israel will stand against the immorality that is pushed by progressives. As long as that immorality is resisted in the name of the God of Israel and in the truth of what the God of Israel stands for, individual freedom and liberty will always have an opportunity. It is only when it is taken away that there will be problems. The reason you have to resist progressives, they're a godless bunch. I'm sorry, they're a godless bunch. Well, my son, I see him in church all the time. You know what? The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also. I'm not hearing that. You'll know them by their fruit. Just because you show up doesn't mean that you're with them. Just means they're fun for you to hang around. Religion is a very critical element in America. It is a basis. It is the basis for individual liberty and freedom, so long as the plurality religion in America centers on the God of Israel, which gives you either Judaism or more directly Christianity. If you ever let those two go in favor of anything else, the American experiment will fail. Stanley, Levy, Black Man Thinkin'. We'll be back right after this. Stanley Levy, Black Man Thinkin', here on the dominant force in internet conservatism, TalkAmericaRadio.us. Also WDDQ Talk 92.1 FM in Valdosta, Georgia. WJHC Talk 107.5 North Florida Talk Radio. FreedomInAmericaRadio.com and WLBB News Talk AM 1330 and FM 106.3 in Carrollton, Georgia. Final segment of the show. Last topic I want to talk about in this whole show, the topic has been pretty much defining America, and that is race. And you may recall that when I talked about immigration, I didn't mention race at all because it has no place. I didn't really talk about race. I mean, I did mention slavery, I did mention Africans, but the bottom line, to make immigration about race is to miss the point of what's happening throughout the whole immigration spectrum of events. But race is an issue for America. It is an issue primarily for one reason, and that was chattel slavery that was practiced for its less than first 90 years. So from 1776 to 1863, slavery was unchallenged as being legal within the United States, at least in some parts. But in that 87-year period, see, this is the interesting thing to me. America is more than 240 years old. Only 87 of those years, the first 87 of those years, were tied to slavery. Yet that is all that a whole bunch of people of quote-unquote African descent think matters in America. Your issue died more than a century and a half ago in a nation that is 240 years old. So 240 out of 90 out of 240 is wow. 62.5% of this nation's existence has been free of chattel slavery, and that's all that some people who were not alive and don't know anyone who was alive when slavery was legal, that's all they want to talk about. They want to talk about reparations for something that did not affect them or anybody that they know. That's what they want to do. And they want people who were as involved with being slave owners as they were with being slaves themselves to pay them for things that they did not experience and that the people from whom they want payment did not perpetrate. And why is that? Because race is the oldest debate. Why is race the oldest debate? Because of chattel slavery. Because you did have people who were of African descent, more them than anyone else, consigned to the class of slave. They weren't the only ones consigned to that class, but they were the greatest number. So, though race is the oldest debate because of that, it is also the least important subject. It just has the greatest consequence from an emotional standpoint. I know that there are people out there saying, oh, there's still racism in America. My response to that is, and what is it keeping you from doing? Because stating that there is racism, but I love to hear the black CEO who's with a PhD and all this other stuff, has his own private jet and everything else, start talking about racism in America. It's laughable. It's like, and on the level of so what? Because it's the hardest area. Race is the hardest area for seekers of fact and truth to stay the course against the tide of emotionalism. Race is an emotional argument. All of the academic arguments regarding race, favoring one over another, are largely dismissed or ignored. Nobody cares that you think one race is greater than another. You generally get the label of being a racist for even having that come out of your mouth. But let's step through this. We have a brief racial history. When the nation was founded, slavery was being debated. The 3/5 Compromise actually protected the majority of the nation from the effects of slavery, and here's how. The 3/5 Compromise actually allowed one nation to form, one United States of America to form, instead of two on the North American continent. Had two nations formed, you would have had one slave nation, in which all blacks would probably be subject to enslavement, and you would have had one free nation. And there would have been a moral divide between those two that would not have been resolved, because they would have had no connection one to another. They would have been separate countries. What you do in that country is your business, and what I do in my country is mine. But the 3/5 Compromise, which dealt only with representation in the House of Representatives, and said for determining how many representatives one would get, we're going to do a census. We're going to do a tax. And all citizens within your borders, will count them fully when we determine how we're going to divvy up the congressional representation in seats. However, if you have people living within your midst who do not have the full rights of citizenship, we're not going to fully count them as though they do. We're only going to count them as 3/5 of a person. The result of that is the southern states ended up with less or fewer seats in the House of Representatives than they otherwise would have received. Is that bad? No. Because it meant they could not control the national agenda in the legislature. Even that compromise was not enough to settle the slavery issue. That required a war. 4 years, bloodiest war in the nation's history. And one of the outcomes was chattel slavery was no longer practiced in the United States. Not legally. Those are just simple facts. The aftermath of slavery was not pretty. Reconstruction was badly handled by the radical Republicans who ran Congress, who believed that the best way to deal with the aftermath of the Civil War and the treatment of the former slaves was to compel the South to change its ways at bayonet point. Military occupation. Well, the old saying remains true. A man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. And by the end of Reconstruction, because at the beginning of Reconstruction, they had wiped out the Democrat Party politically in the Old South. By the end of Reconstruction, the Democrats had regained control of the South. And people keep forgetting that this whole thing about slavery, it affected only the states that were involved in the Civil War. Not all of the states were involved in the Civil War. There were states that were added to the Union after the Civil War began who had no part in the war. The whole western United States, west of Texas, was not involved in the Civil War. The race debate was centered in the 10 states that seceded. The Mason-Dixon line, south of the Mason-Dixon line, and east of Texas. So, once you deal with facts like slavery was not universal for black people, it was not universally practiced throughout the United States. Blacks owned slaves too in the South. Yes, they did. Don't know why people don't want to acknowledge that, but they did. One of the mega plantations. And by mega plantations, it meant that they had 100 slaves or more. The average slave owner in the United States had 5 slaves. So if you had more than 5 slaves, you were doing well. Of course, slaves cost money. There was a black family in Louisiana in 1860 that had more than 100 slaves, black slaves. You get my drift here? It's not what you think it was. It really isn't. What about Jim Crow? Part of the aftermath. That was worked out too. There was a civil rights movement. There was a Montgomery bus boycott. All the things that went on with that. Was it painful? Yeah, very painful. I lived through part of it. Is it over? Yeah, that's over. Are there any other things left to do with respect to race? There are. But most of the problems with race for black people are within the black community. White people are not impregnating black females and having almost 80% of them give birth outside of wedlock. That's not happening. White people are not impregnating black women and then having them go kill their babies at the highest rate of anyone in the United States. Black abortion rates are ridiculous. White people are not infecting 48.8% of black women with herpes. And rates for other sexually transmitted diseases are ridiculously high and lead the nation. White people are not forcing black people to get divorced. It's not happening. These are the things that hold back the black people. Black criminality per capita is ridiculous, ridiculously high. 40%, more than 40% of all homicides, all murders are committed by blacks. Blacks are only 13% of the population. 52% of homicide victims in this country are black. Blacks are only 13% of the population. 28% of all violent crime in America is committed by blacks. Blacks are only 13% of the population. The problem racially for blacks is blacks and their behavior toward, get this, each other. If blacks treated blacks the way they say they want whites to treat them, I don't know that there would be any problems race-wise in this country. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. And I'm going to wrap this up. I wanted to make sure we talked about certain things: abortion, immigration, trade, fairness, religion, and race. When you come to define America, all these things play a role, but the one thing that defines America through all this and will guide America through all this remains this: we hold these truths to be self-evident. that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and last and certainly not least, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it and to institute new government. If you keep focused on those things which are the 5 self-evident truths tied to the American ethic, you'll be able to navigate all these other waters. If you lose sight of that in the progressive rhetoric that tries to get you to focus on things that do not matter, to major in the minors, while they seek to destroy your country, well, then they'll win. Don't let them. God bless you. God keep you. And until next week, do take care.
You've been listening to Black Man Thinkin' with your host, Stan Levy. Join Stan midnight to 2 a.m. That's late Monday night into early Tuesday morning. And find him on the web at Black Man Thinkin' without the G. That's blackmanthinkin.com.